You will be betrothed by Christmas, Junior, or you will be nothing at all, do you hear me? A governess to some merchants' brats in the north, if you are fortunate. Nothing if you are not. The words came down the cold stone gallery of Cawood Court like water dripping through a crack, and Rodmond, Duke of Nordale, stopped where he stood in the shadow of a window bay and did not announce himself. He had come this way to escape a drawing room, not to eavesdrop upon a quarrel. Yet the voice that answered arrested him more surely than the threat had. "I hear you very well, uncle," a young woman said. "You have said it 4 times since Michaelmas. I find it loses none of its music through repetition. There was no tremor in it. That was what held him. A girl cornered in a draughty passage by a man twice her size ought, by every law he understood, to weep or to plead or to fall silent under the weight of him. This one had answered dry as salt, and Rodmond, who had spent a dozen years teaching himself to hear the lie beneath every pleasant sound, heard none beneath hers. He moved a half-pace and saw them through the stone mullions. The man was florid, well-fed, dressed a shade too richly for a guest at another man's house, Silas Croat, whose name Rodmond knew the way one knows the name of a debt collector, a fellow forever at the edges of better society, mortgaging the respectability he had married into. And before him stood a young woman in a grey gown gone soft at the cuffs from too many washings, a shawl drawn close, her chin level. She was not beautiful in the manner the season prized. She was something harder to dismiss. She looked, Rodmond thought, like a person who had decided long ago that the world would not have the satisfaction of watching her flinch. "Your father," Croat said, low and vicious, "was a sentimental fool who thought a clause in a will could purchase you a husband. Married by your 25th year, or the whole of it, house portion, the very roof, comes to me. Well, your 25th year expires at Christmas, and I do not see a bridegroom crowding the lane." He smiled. "I have taken pains that you should not. A word here, a word there. No respectable man comes near a girl with a grasping uncle and not a farthing of her own to bless her. So you will be reasonable. You will accept Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt is 60 and buries wives the way other men change horses. Mr. Pruitt will have you, and afterward I shall have the peace of never looking at you again. Consider which of us is the more fortunate." Rodmond waited for her to break. She did not. She drew the shawl a fraction higher, as though the cold were the only enemy in the passage worth the trouble of guarding against, and she said, "Then I shall be nothing, uncle, and I shall be it without Mr. Pruitt. You may keep the house. You cannot make me lie in a church." She turned and walked away from him, not quickly, not in flight, but the even pace of a woman crossing her own hall, and Croat's face went the colour of a raw joint, and he called after her a thing so ugly that Rodmond, without deciding to, stepped out of the window bay into the light. He said nothing, he merely stood and let himself be seen. He had learned long ago what his own presence did to rooms. He was a tall man, dark, unsmiling, with the kind of face the fashionable ladies called forbidding when they wished to be admired for their daring in approaching it. 10 years of widowerhood and reticence had wrapped about him like a second coat, and men who owed money to men who owed money to dukes did not, as a rule, care to be observed in the act of threatening a portionless girl. Croat's mouth worked. The colour drained from florid to grey. "Your Grace," he managed, "I did not, that is, a family matter, nothing to trouble." "I heard the whole of your family matter," Rodmond said. His voice was quiet, and quiet from him carried further than most men's shouting. It wanted for charm. He did not raise a hand or a threat. He had no need. He let the silence do the work silence did when a duke chose to spend it. And Croat bowed and bowed again, and removed himself down the gallery with the scuttling haste of a man who has remembered a pressing engagement in another county. Rodmond watched him go with a distaste that surprised him by its heat. He had thought himself long past caring what such men did to such girls. The world was full of Croats. He had never before felt the particular wish to take one by the collar and set him out in the snow. The young woman had stopped at the far end of the passage at the turn of the stair, and she had seen the whole of it. She stood now regarding him with an expression he could not at once read, not gratitude, which he would have distrusted, and not the practiced alarm of a girl who has just discovered a duke has taken an interest, something cooler, something like appraisal. "You need not have done that," she said. "It will cost me." He is worse when he has been made small in front of his betters. You call me his better. I call you taller and richer, which in my uncle's arithmetic is the same sum. She came a few steps toward him, unhurried. But I thank you for the intention, whatever it costs. It is not every day a stranger troubles himself over a matter that gains him nothing. You assume it gains me nothing. You are the Duke of Nordale, she said. I heard your name in the drawing-room, spoken the way one speaks of weather that may turn. I cannot conceive what a portionless companion could offer that a man with 3 estates would trouble to collect. She inclined her head, a small grave courtesy. Junior Fenimore, I am here to fetch and carry for my cousin, which is to say to be reminded hourly what I am. You will excuse me. The soup wants serving, and I am late to be humiliated over it. She was turning to go, and Rodmund, who had not, in 10 careful years, done a single thing on impulse, heard himself say, Miss Fenimore, stay a moment. She stopped. He was not, even as he spoke, entirely certain what had moved him. Part of it was the drawing-room he had fled, and the reason he had fled it. Lady Carwood's endless supper table, and at his elbow every evening the ambitious loveliness of Miss Millicent Lovelace, whose mother had all but drawn up the settlements, and whose every laugh at his every remark was pitched to be overheard and reported. He had come to this cursed Christmas gathering out of an obligation to his late brother's memory, and found himself the fox in a country hunt, run to ground nightly by silk and strategy. He had spent the fortnight declining to be caught, and the declining wearied him past bearing. And part of it, the greater part, though he would not have owned it, was that this girl in her washed grey gown had looked at him and seen a duke and not a rescue, and had turned to go back to the soup. You require a betrothal by Christmas, he said. I require the opposite of one. I require, most particularly, to be seen to be already spoken for, so thoroughly and so publicly that a certain lady and her mother might at last permit me to eat a meal in peace. He watched her face. It seems to me we each hold precisely what the other lacks. For a long moment she said nothing at all. The tall windows behind him let in the grey December light, and somewhere below a door opened on a swell of laughter and closed again, and Junior Fenimore studied him as though he were a sum that did not quite come out. You are proposing, she said slowly, that I pretend. I am proposing that we pretend, together and with conviction. That you permit it to be understood, no vows, no church, no promise either of us must keep past 12th night. That the Duke of Nordale has against all expectation formed an attachment to a young woman of no fortune whatever. His mouth twisted, not quite a smile. It has the virtue of being so improbable that no one will think to doubt it. Men believe most easily the things that flatter their sense of the world's strangeness. And at Christmas, when your Miss Lovelace has despaired and gone home, then the attachment cools, as attachments do. We part with civility. You will have had a season under my protection, and a duke's protection, Miss Fenimore, is a wall your uncle cannot climb. He will not marry you to his Mr. Pruitt, while the whole county believes a duke means to have you. And you will have had time, which is the one thing your father's will did not think to leave you enough of. She turned that over. He could see her turning it, not snatching at it, which he had half expected, and which would have soured the whole thing in his mouth, but weighing it as a woman weighs a thing she does not trust because it is too fine. There is a flaw in your reasoning, she said at last. A betrothal that costs you nothing costs me a great deal. When it ends, you are the same duke you were, wearied of a poor girl and moved on, and no one thinks the worse of you. But I am the companion who reached above her station and was set down again. I should be more ruined at the finish than I am now, and I am already, as you see, nearly ruined. She lifted her chin. You have thought of your peace at supper. Have you thought of what your peace at supper costs me? He had not. That was the truth of it, and it landed in him with an odd small shock, because it had been a very long time since anyone had told him a plain uncomfortable thing to his face without varnish, without the sideways glance that measured how the truth was being received. Everyone he knew arranged their honesty for his benefit the way a servant arranges a fire. No, he said, I had not thought of it. You are right to name it. Something shifted in her face, surprise, quickly mastered. She had expected him to be affronted. He found he did not much like being a man from whom such a thing was expected. Then let us alter the terms, he said. Not a betrayal at the finish, a betrothal quietly and mutually dissolved by you if you like. Let the county say the poor girl thought better of the cold Duke of Nordale and would not have him. Let them say you refused a duke. There is no ruin in that, Miss Fenimore. There is a legend in it. Now he did smile faintly, and it felt strange on his face, an unaccustomed muscle. You would be the one woman in England who looked at all this. He moved his hand, taking in himself the title, the 3 estates, the whole cold weight of it, and walked away. They will be talking of you at Christmas dinners for 20 years. For the first time, the corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile she gave him. It was a smile she was suppressing, which he found he wanted far more. You are either the most honest man I have met at this gathering, she said, or the most dangerous, and I have not yet decided which. They are frequently the same man. So I begin to suspect. She looked at him a long moment more, and he had the sensation, rare and not entirely comfortable, of being seen, not the title, not the fortune, not the forbidding face the ladies dared each other over, but the man wearing them. Why? In truth, a duke does not lack for shields. You might have a real betrothal for the asking. There is one downstairs who would have you before the tea grew cold. Why choose a false one with a girl who serves your soup? He was quiet. Outside the snow had begun, small and fine against the grey. He thought of a ballroom 11 years gone, of a woman named Corisande with a laugh like silver bells, who had told him she loved him under exactly such falling snow, and who had said to her friends, when she thought him gone from the terrace, that the Duke of Nordale was a dull, cold fish, but a girl could warm herself very well at 3 estates. He had married elsewhere, dutifully, unhappily, and been widowed, and through all of it that laugh had lived in him like a splinter under the nail, and taught him the one lesson he had never unlearned, that warmth offered to a duke was a coin, and every coin was counterfeit, and a wise man did not pick them up. Because a false thing openly agreed, he said finally, cannot deceive me. I know the price of it before I begin. It is the true things I no longer trust. He met her eyes. You need not understand that. You need only tell me whether we have a bargain. She did not press him. That too he noticed, that where another would have leaned toward the crack he had shown, curious to widen it, Junior Fenimore let it be. As one lets be a door another has chosen not to open. We have a bargain, she said, on conditions. You will not speak for me as though I were bought. In company you may hold my hand and look at me as men are said to look, and I will do my part and look back, and we will be very convincing. But when there is no one to convince, you will remember that I am not your servant, and I will remember that you are not my rescue, and we will deal with one another as 2 people who have made an honest agreement about a dishonest thing. Is that understood, Your Grace, Rodmond? He said. She blinked. If you are to be my betrothed before all of Woodcourt by supper, Miss Fenimore, you cannot go on calling me Your Grace as though I were a magistrate. My name is Rodmond. You had as well begin. The snow came down, somewhere below the great bell, for the dressing hour began to toll. And she glanced toward the sound, and then back at him, and there was something in her steady grey regard that he could not have named and did not try to, only that it warmed a place in his chest he had thought long since gone to stone, and that this alarmed him considerably more than Silas Croat ever could. Very well, she said. Rodmond. She tried the name as one tries a step in the dark. And you had better call me Junior and mean it, or the first sharp-eyed dowager will have us out inside the hour. Junior. He inclined his head, gravely, as though they had concluded a treaty between nations, which in a sense they had. Then it is agreed. At supper tonight, I shall commit the most talked-of folly of my life, and you shall refuse, in the fullness of time, the most eligible man in 3 counties. Let us go and astonish everyone. There is one thing more, she said, and for the first time a shadow crossed the steadiness of her. My uncle will not simply retreat because a duke has frowned at him. He is a man who has staked everything on that clause in my father's will, and men who have staked everything grow clever and desperate together. He will watch us. He will look for the seam in the cloth. And if he finds that your attachment is painted on, that there is no marriage coming, only a season of pretense, he will have his Mr. Pruitt and his church and his triumph, and there will be nothing you or your title can do to stop him. So we must be better liars than he is a doubter. Do you understand what you are asking of us both? I understand it, Rodmond said, and he did. Perhaps than she knew, for deception practiced well was the one art at which his sorrows had made him a master. He will look for the seam. He will not find it. I have spent 11 years learning to show the world a face that gives nothing away. I have simply never before had a reason to be glad of the education. He paused. You need only be yourself, Junior. It is I who must do the acting. You have merely to permit yourself to be looked at as though you were the whole of what a man wanted. I am told it is not so difficult a thing to bear. They will hate me, she said, but she said it lightly now, testing the shape of the danger. Miss Lovelace, her mother, all of them. A poor companion who caught what they hunted. Yes, Rodmond said, and found, to his own quiet unease, that the thought did not trouble him at all, that he was, if anything, looking forward to the sight of it. I expect they will. Take my arm, Junior. We may as well begin as we mean to go on. She looked at his offered arm for the length of one breath, the arm of the Duke of Nordale, extended in a cold gallery to a girl in a washed grey gown who had, 4 minutes past, been on her way to serve the soup. Then she laid her hand upon it, light as a settling bird, and he felt the cool press of her fingers through his sleeve, and neither of them, in that moment, was pretending anything at all. Down the great staircase they went together, into the light and the noise and the turning heads, and Rodmond, who had come to Cawood Court to be left in peace, understood with the clarity of a man watching his own house catch quietly alight that he had just, of his own free and deliberate will, done the single most reckless thing of his careful life, and that he had not the smallest wish to undo it. The supper room at Cawood Court had been built in a grander century to seat 40, and Lady Cawood, who never wearied of saying so, had contrived to fill it with half that number and twice the noise. Candles stood in double rows down a table dressed for the season, holly and trailing ivy laid along the white, oranges studded with clove, a great silver epergne heaped with hothouse fruit that had cost more than a curate earned in a year. Into this warm and glittering din Rodmond walked with Junior Fenimore's hand upon his arm, and he felt the room change around him the way a pond changes when a stone goes into it, a hush spreading outward from the door, ring on ring, until even the footman paused with the dishes half lowered. He had anticipated it. He had, if he were honest with the private part of himself that he seldom consulted, rather looked forward to it. What he had not anticipated was the steadiness of the hand on his sleeve. He could feel her pulse through the thin stuff of her glove, quick as a wren's, and yet her fingers did not so much as tremble, and her chin, when he glanced down at her, was level as it had been in the cold gallery when her uncle called her nothing. She was frightened. She was simply declining, as was apparently her lifelong habit, to give the fear the satisfaction of showing. Courage, he murmured, for ear alone, bending his dark head a fraction toward the soft brown of her hair. You have only to be dull and adored. I shall manage the rest. I have had a great deal of practice at being dull, she answered, under the swell of the room. It is the adored part that wants rehearsal. He very nearly smiled. He caught it in time. A duke did not smile in a doorway like a boy at a fair, but the wanting to had come up in him unbidden and quick, and he filed the fact away with the wary attention of a man who has found a door he does not remember leaving unlocked. Lady Cawood came sailing down upon them in oyster silk, her face a study in a lifetime's practised welcome, fighting a genuine and undignified astonishment. Your Grace, she cried, and then, faltering, her eyes dropping to the grey figure at his elbow and rising again in frank bewilderment, and Miss Fenimore, how very unexpected to see you, that is, how well you look this evening. Miss Fenimore has consented to sit with me, Rodmond said. He did not raise his voice. He had learned long ago that the surest way to command a room was to make it lean in to hear you. You will forgive the disarrangement of your table, madam. I find I have grown weary of my own company, and Miss Fenimore is the only person under this roof who has not, in a fortnight, tried to sell me anything. He let the words settle, including herself. It is a novelty I mean to indulge. The colour that came up in Lady Cawood's face was worth, he thought, the whole tedious journey north. Below and along the table the sentence went down the ranks in whispers, and he watched heads turn to Junior and away, turn and away, and read in every glance the same swift, ugly arithmetic. The companion, the poor relation, the girl who fetched the shawls, and beside her the Duke of Nordale, 3 estates and a coronet, choosing her out of the whole bright field. It ought to have been absurd. He was aware that it teetered upon the absurd. But he had spent 11 years being looked at as a prize to be got, and there was a savage and unexpected pleasure in being, for one evening, looked at as a man who had done the getting himself. They were seated near the head, of course. Lady Colwood could no more have put a duke below the salt than she could have served the fish cold, and so it fell out that Junior Fenimore, who by the ordinary reckoning of the house belonged somewhere near its foot with the poor cousins and the parson's wife, was handed to a chair 3 places from her hostess, with Rodmund at her right hand, directly opposite, in rose-coloured satin and a temper very ill concealed. Miss Millicent Lovelace. He had known that too must come, and had steeled himself for it. Miss Lovelace was beautiful in the way the season worshipped, a clear high complexion, eyes of a fashionable pale blue, a neck like a swan, and a laugh she had drilled to carry precisely as far as she wished it to reach. For a fortnight that laugh had been aimed at him nightly like a fowling piece. Now she turned it, all at once, upon the woman across the cloth. "Miss Fenimore," she said, sweet as sugared almonds, "I declare I hardly knew you out of your apron. How clever of Nordale to have found you. One so rarely thinks to look for company among a delicate pause, the pause of a surgeon choosing where to cut, among the useful people. Tell me, do you still darn my mother's stockings so beautifully? She was only saying yesterday she has never had it done half so well since." It was neatly aimed. It was meant to fix Junior in her place before the whole table, to remind every listening ear what she was, and what she could not be, and Rodmund felt the old anger stir in him, the anger he had spent a decade learning to keep behind his teeth. He set down his glass, and had begun, very deliberately, to draw breath to answer for her, when Junior answered for herself. "I do, Miss Lovelace," she said, and there was no heat in it, none at all. Only that dry level music he had first heard through the mullions of a cold passage. "I darn them very well. It is honest work, and I have never been ashamed of it, though I own it is generous of you to raise the subject at your own table, where so many might learn how carefully your family's economies are kept." She lifted her spoon to the soup with perfect composure. "Your mother's stockings and I are old acquaintance. I should be sorry to think either of us had come down in the world." There was a silence of exactly the length it takes a struck man to feel the blow. Then, further down the board, someone laughed, a short, delighted, involuntary bark. Quickly smothered, and the pale blue eyes across the table went hard and bright, and Rodmund understood with a small interior jolt that he had just watched a portionless girl in a washed grey gown take the field against the reigning beauty of 3 counties and carry it clean. Without raising her voice, without cruelty, on nothing but the truth turned neatly on its edge, he said nothing. He found he did not need to. He picked up his glass again, and over its rim he looked at Junior Fenimore, and this time he did not bother to catch the thing that came up in him. He let it show, one slow private lift at the corner of his mouth, meant for her and for no one else. She caught it. A faint answering warmth touched her own grave face and was governed at once, but he had seen it, and he was ambushed to discover how much he had wanted to. "You must not do that too often," he told her low, while the table rearranged its scattered composure and Miss Lovelace applied herself with great concentration to a wing of pheasant. "Win, I mean. It is very bad for the digestion of everyone present. I did not begin it." He agreed. "You never begin it. I begin to see that is a whole of your trouble in this world. You wait to be struck, and only then defend yourself, and so everyone believes they may strike you for nothing." He turned the stem of his glass. "It is a costly virtue. I have never been able to afford it." She looked at him then, full, a longer look than a woman ought to give a man she was merely painted against, and he had the disquieting sense of being weighed on a fine and honest scale. "And what do you do instead, your grace, when someone means to strike you?" "I let them believe they have," he said, "and I remember it, and I make quite certain the season is long and their creditors patient." He heard how it sounded even as he said it, cold, exact, a portrait of a man he had spent years lacquering onto himself. And waited for her to be a little afraid of him, as sensible people were. Instead she considered it gravely, as though he had confessed to a limp rather than a cruelty. "That must be very tiring," was all she said, and returned to her soup. No one had told him that in 11 years. They flattered the coldness or they feared it. They never once looked at it as though it were a burden a man might be permitted to set down. It landed in him somewhere beneath the careful lacquer and stayed. Down the table the supper went on. Rodman performed. He was good at it, better, God help him, than he had let himself remember. He leaned to Junior when the covers changed. He chose her the best of the game with his own hand and laid it upon her plate before the footman could reach. He asked her, in a voice pitched just short of intimate, whether she was warm enough, whether she cared for the music that would come after, whether she found the north as bleak as they threatened it would be in January. Each attention landed among the watching faces like a coin dropped in a quiet church. He was aware of Silas Croat 3 seats along, gone still as a pointing dog, his florid face working as he searched the two of them for the seam in the cloth, for the false note, the painted-on thing, the proof that no marriage was coming and the will's clause might still be his. Rodman gave him nothing. He had promised her that. He gave the whole room a duke visibly, unhurriedly, ruinously taken with a companion in a grey gown, and he did it so well that Croat curdled visibly to something colder before the second remove was cleared. Once, and only once, Croat ventured to test the cloth himself. He leaned along the table with the false heartiness of a man who has decided to be jovial about a ruin, and said loud enough to draw the nearer ears, "Your Grace must forgive a plain uncle's curiosity, but this is sudden, is it not? Why, a fortnight since my niece was carrying the shawls, and now she carries a duke's arm. One scarcely dares ask how so great a thing ripened so quick." The whole of that end of the table went quiet to hear it, and Rodman felt Junior beside him draw the smallest breath, and knew the seam had been reached for at last, in the open, before witnesses. He did not hurry. He turned his glass a slow half-turn upon the cloth, and let the pause do the work a shout could not. "Things ripen quick, Mr. Croat, when a man has spent 11 years letting nothing ripen at all," he said. "I have declined a good many arms in that time, offered me, I may say, with a great deal more strategy and a great deal less merit. Your niece offered me nothing whatever. I found I could not stop thinking of her for precisely that reason. You will understand that a man in my position learns to prize the one person in a house who does not want anything of him." He let his gaze rest, cool and complete, upon the florid working face. "I confess I had not looked to find her under your roof. But then, I understand she has not always been shown the value of what she is. That at least I mean to correct. It was a hit, and a public one, and Croat had the wit to feel it. He sat back with a laugh that did not reach his eyes and applied himself to his wine, and did not test the cloth again. But beneath the table, hidden by the fall of the linen, Rodman felt Junior's hand find the edge of his sleeve and press it once briefly in what he chose, against all his training, to believe was gratitude rather than performance, and he laid 2 fingers over hers before he had decided to, and held them there a moment, and neither of them looked at the other at all. What Rodman had not reckoned upon, what no one had thought to warn him of, because no one had known there was anything to warn, was how little of it, as the evening wore on, he was troubling to perform. He noticed it first over the syllabubs, when Lady Carwood pressed some tediousness upon the table about a mutual acquaintance's carriage, and he found he had stopped attending to her entirely, and was instead watching the way Junior listened to a shy young clergyman on her other side, a Mr. Aldous, seated there plainly as a slight, the least of the men to pair with the least of the women. She gave the boy her whole grave attention. She drew him out about his living and his mother and his hopes with a warmth she had spent not one drop of upon the Duke of Nordale. And the young man bloomed under it like a plant brought him from frost, and Rodman sat with his wine untasted, absurd as it was in a man of his years and his coldness, something that was not very far from envy. It was not that she performed her kindness. That was precisely it. Miss Lovelace performed. Every laugh of hers was aimed and every glance was spent to purchase. He had known 100 such women and married, dutifully and unhappily, into the general truth of them. But this one was warm to a poor curate who could do nothing for her, at a table where warmth cost her standing she could ill afford, and she was warm to him for no reason under heaven but that he was frightened and young and no one else would trouble. There was no coin in it. Rodman had built the whole architecture of his guarded life upon the certainty that there was always, somewhere, a coin in it. That warmth offered was warmth for sale, and every offered coin was counterfeit, and a wise man kept his hands in his pockets. And here across a Christmas table sat a girl handing the true thing out freely to a person who could never repay her, and it made a quiet nonsense of 11 years of his hard-won wisdom, and he could not, for the life of him, look away from it. "You are staring, Your Grace," Junior said without turning her head, when the clergyman had at last been claimed by the lady beyond him. "It is very well done, I grant you, for the benefit of the room. But you have been staring some while now, and the room has gone into the music, and there is no one left at this end of the table to deceive but the candles." He had not known the guests had risen. He had not marked the scrape of chairs, the drift toward the far doors, the thinning of the noise into a distant tuning of strings. The great table lay half abandoned between the guttering candles, and it was true, there was no one to play the scene for now. Croat had gone, Miss Lovelace had swept out on her mother's arm with her chin high and her hopes rearranged. Lady Cowood was chivying her party toward the pianoforte. The performance was over, and still he was turned toward Junior Fenimore in the emptying light, and had been, he now understood, for some time, with nothing whatever to gain by it. "So there is not," he said. He ought to have said something ready. He was a man of ready things. It was another of the lacquers. But the truthful answer had come up in him too fast for the polished one to reach the surface first, and he heard himself, to his own faint alarm, tell her the truth. "I was not deceiving anyone just then, Miss Fenimore. That is the difficulty. I appear to have forgot, for the better part of an hour, that any of this was meant to be pretended at all." She went very still. The candlelight moved on her plain face, on the soft-washed grey of her gown, on the eyes that had weighed him and found him, apparently, only tired. And for a moment she said nothing, and he could not read her, and he discovered that not being able to read her mattered to him in a way that nothing had mattered in a long and armoured while. "That," she said at last low, "is precisely the thing we agreed neither of us would do." She rose, gathering her shawl with those steady darning-worn hands. "Come, Your Grace, they will want their Duke for the music. Let us go and be looked at." She did not wait for his arm. She went toward the far doors and the light and the small silver noise of the strings, and Rodmond sat one moment longer alone at the ruined table among the dying candles, watching the grey figure grow small against the brightness, and knew, with the cold, clear certainty of a man who has spent his whole life recognizing a lie and has just, for once, been unable to find one, that he was in a very great deal of trouble, and that he had not the smallest intention of getting himself out of it. He rose and followed her into the light. The first snow had made the roads a rumour, and so the whole restless company of Cawood Court was penned indoors together, which was, Rodmond had come to understand, the true peril of a Christmas gathering, not the cold without, but the heat of a dozen idle people packed within, each hungry for something to say of the others. Lady Cowood had answered the confinement in the manner of hostesses everywhere, by making of it an occasion. The long saloon had been hung that afternoon with holly and trailing ivy. Ropes have looped from sconce to sconce until the candlelight caught green in every corner, and a fire built up the height of a man roared in the great hearth, and 40 guests moved through it all in silk and superfine, laughing a little too loudly at the pleasure of being observed doing so. He stood near the tall windows with a glass he did not want, and watched Junior cross the room. She was carrying a shawl for her cousin, Miss Amelia Croat, a pallid, peevish girl who had learned her father's habit of using people and none of his cunning in concealing it. And she carried it the way she did everything, without hurry and without apology, as though the errand were entirely her own idea and reflected no want in her at all. She had dressed for the evening in the only silk she owned, a soft dove-grey some years out of the fashion, and she had pinned a sprig of the holly at her breast, and Rodmond found that his eye went to her across the whole length of the room and stayed, and that he was obliged to remind himself to look elsewhere, and that the reminder availed him nothing. He had spent the fortnight before her arrival being hunted, and he knew the sensation of every eye in a room bending toward him. He had not known, until these last days, the stranger sensation of bending his own toward another and being unable to stop. "She wears the same gown thrice in a week," said a voice at his shoulder, pitched sweet and low and exactly loud enough. "One does admire economy. My mother says there is nothing so vulgar as a lady who thinks of money, but I am sure I think of it a great deal, only I have the good fortune never to want any." Miss Millicent Lovelace had come to beside him, a vision in celestial blue, her fair curls dressed with bandeau of seed pearls. And around her the little court that went everywhere she did, two Lovelace cousins and a languid young man named Petherick who laughed before her jokes were finished, in case there should not be time enough after. She had a lovely face. Rodmond had granted it from the first and thought no more of it than he thought of a well-made clock. Everything in it moved toward an end, and the end was always the same. Miss Lovelace, he said, and inclined his head the exact civil inch that closed a subject rather than opened one. She was not to be closed. You will think me unkind, she went on, watching Junior with a smile of great tenderness, but I confess I feel for the poor creature. To be a companion is hard enough, always the last to eat, the first to be blamed, but to be a companion who forgets her place. One cannot help but pity where one cannot approve. Someone ought to have a word with her, for her own sake, before she is made truly ridiculous. Do you not agree, your grace, you who are so kind? He had been called many things in 11 years of careful living. Kind had not commonly been among them, and he understood the word for what it was, a baited and cast, an invitation to join her in the sport and so declare himself hers. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and Millicent, undeterred, raised her voice a graceful degree and turned it upon its object as Junior came within its reach. Miss Fenimore, do come and settle a question for us. We were speaking of the assembly at Harrogate last winter. You will not have been, of course, but you will have heard the companions talk of it below stairs. They always know the best gossip, and I said the season's fashion was for silver tissue, and Mr. Petherick said gold. Which was it? You must have had the dressing of a great many ladies who went. It was very prettily done. Rodmond, who had made a study of cruelty as it was practiced in drawing-rooms, could admire the craftsmanship, even as it turned his stomach, the way the whole insult was folded inside a request for help. So that to be wounded by it a girl must first appear to have expected to be treated as an equal, and so convict herself of the very presumption. Half the room had turned to watch. Silas Croat, by the card tables, had set down his hand and was watching too, with the flat attention of a man who hopes to see a rival's paint begin to run. Junior settled the shawl upon her cousin's shoulders first, unhurried, only then turned. I could not tell you, Miss Lovelace, she said. I have never had the dressing of a lady who went to Harrogate, but I have had the dressing of a great many wounds. My father was ill 3 years before he died, and there was no one else, and I learned in that time that silver and gold look very much alike by a sickbed, and that neither is worth a clean linen cloth and a steady hand. She smiled, and there was nothing sharp in it, which made it worse for those who had hoped to see her bleed. I am sorry to be so poor a judge of tissue. I have spent my usefulness on plainer stuff. The silence that followed was of a particular texture Rodmond knew well, the silence of people who have gathered to watch a small creature torn and find, instead, that it has looked up at them with clear eyes and named exactly what they are. Millicent's smile held, but the corners it had begun the labour of holding. Petherick, who had no wit of his own and so no defence against another's, laughed once uncertainly, before he understood that the laugh should have gone the other way, and swallowed it half-made. One of the Lovelace cousins, a sharp-nosed girl named Frederica, who had staked her whole small importance upon being useful to Millicent, tried to mend the field. How affecting, she said. But you know, Miss Fenimore, a lady of true delicacy, would not speak of sick-beds and linen in a saloon. It is not quite nice. One feels one is being made to look at things one came an evening party expressly to forget. She glanced about for approval, and found less of it than she had counted upon, for there is a point past which cruelty stops flattering a room and begins to shame it. And the company had felt the point pass. You are quite right, said Junior, with a graciousness so complete it left no purchase anywhere. It is not nice at all. I have found that very little of real use ever is. But I will gladly speak of pleasanter things, if you will name one. I am told I am agreeable enough over the weather, and I have a great deal to say in praise of a warm fire, having sat by so few of them. She said it without a trace of self-pity, as one states a fact of no more weight than the hour, and Frederica, who had wanted a victim and been handed a mirror, discovered she had nothing further to add. And Rodmond, who had promised himself he would do only what the pretence required and not a hair's breadth more, who had built his whole survival upon the principle of doing less than he felt, heard himself speak into that silence before he had resolved to. "You are too modest, Junior." He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He crossed the small distance to her side, and he took her hand, and he laid it upon his arm, and he let the room see him do it slowly, so that there should be no doubt anywhere that it was done on purpose. "Miss Lovelace asks who is the better judge of silver tissue. I should have thought the question was who in this room can dress a wound, and sit 3 years by a dying man, and come out of it able to smile at all. There is a fashion in that too. It is only that it comes round less often." He looked, without haste, from one face of the little court to the next, and each in turn something to examine upon the floor. "I find it becomes her." He felt the small start go through Junior's fingers where they rested on his sleeve. She had not asked to be defended, and he half expected to be made to pay for it later, in that dry, level voice, for going past the terms. But she did not pull her hand away. She stood with her chin at its usual honest level and let him have said it. And the warmth of her hand came through the wool of his coat and settled somewhere under his ribs, and he thought, with the distant alarm of a man who feels the ice give a quarter-inch beneath his boot, that he had not defended her for the pretence at all. The pretence had merely given him leave to do the thing he already wished to do. Millicent recovered first. She had been raised too well to bleed in public. "How gallant," she said, and the sweetness of it had gone thin and cold as skimmed milk. "You will make us all quite envious, Your Grace, championing a lady so. Mr. Petherick, I find I'm wanted at the pianoforte. Someone must give these good people a carol, and it plainly will not be Miss Fenimore. She has been too busy at her wounds to have learnt the tunes." And she swept away in her celestial blue on a laugh she had manufactured from nothing, gathering her court behind her, and left the field, which is to say she left it looking as though she had chosen to. Across the room, Silas Croat picked up his cards again, but he did not play them at once. He sat a moment turning them in his fingers, his small eyes moving between Rodmond and his niece with a slow, chewing attention. And Rodmond saw in that look precisely what Junior had warned him of in the cold gallery, a man measuring cloth for a seam, patient and unhurried, willing to be shown a great deal before he believed any of it. Rodmond met the look and held it until Croat returned to his hand and marked coolly that the truce he had bought in the gallery was no truce at all, but only a man learning to be careful. The music began, Millicent's fingers bright and accurate upon the keys, her voice pretty and pitched for the room, and the company turned toward her gratefully, glad of somewhere to put their eyes. Under cover of it Junior drew her hand from his arm gently, but she drew it, and said low, "You said you would do the acting and I need only be looked at. That was a good deal more than looking." "It was," he admitted. "You went past the terms." "I did." He found he could not, for once, arrange his face to give nothing away. He was aware of it and could not mend it. "You may scold me for it if you like. I find I would rather be scolded by you than thanked by them." That stopped her. She turned her head and looked at him fully, there in the green-hung, candle-warm crowd, and for a moment the whole bright noise of the room seemed to move a step further off. "I was not going to scold you," she said at last. "I was going to say that no one has done such a thing for me in a very long while, and that I do not quite know where to put it. Gratitude is a coin, you told me. You do not care to be paid in it, so I shall not pay you. I shall only say it was kindly done and leave it there, and you may take it or not as you please." There was no varnish on it. That was the thing that undid him a little more each time she spoke. That she offered him the plain fact of her feeling, and then set it down between them and stepped back from it, asking nothing, angling for nothing, so that a man who had spent 11 years watching for the hidden want, in every kindness kept reaching for hers and closing his hand on air. "Walk with me a moment," he said, "to the far window. We are betrothed, it is expected, and I find I do not wish to hear Miss Lovelace sing." They went, and the crowd let them go with a rustle of glances that was exactly what the pretence required and did not tonight feel like the pretence at all. At the cold end of the saloon the tall windows gave onto the park, where the snow had begun again, drifting slow and steady through the dark beyond the glass, and the fire's warmth did not reach, and they could speak beneath the music without being overheard. He watched us, Junior said. My uncle. You saw. I saw. He is not persuaded. He never will be wholly. He cannot afford to be. Everything he wants depends on his finding this out to be false. She was quiet a moment, looking at the snow. I have been thinking, since the gallery, that I made you promise a hard thing without warning you how hard. You must be looked at as closely as I am now, and by a man with more reason to look. Every glance you give me will be weighed. Every one you fail to give me will be weighed heavier. Then I shall have to give them, Rodman said, and mean nothing by them, and let him make of that what he can. She turned from the window and studied him, and there was in her grey eyes that same cool appraisal that had first arrested him in the gallery, the look of a person taking his measure and declining to be dazzled by any part of him that was not the man. She asked, "Mean nothing?" "You are said to be a cold man, Rodmond. Half this house is afraid of you, and the other half is only pretending not to be. I have watched you these days, and I do not think you are cold at all. I think you are a warm man who has decided, very hard and very long ago, to behave like a cold one, and that is a different thing, and a lonelier one, and I do not think it can be kept up forever under the kind of watching my uncle means to do." No one had said such a thing to him. In 11 years, no one had come so near the shape of the carried and named it so quietly without triumph, without the sideways glance to see how the blow was received. He ought to have turned it aside. He had 100 smooth ways to turn such a thing aside. He had built them, one by one, as another man builds a wall. He found that he did not want to use any of them. "You are very sure," he said, "of a man you have known 4 days." "I am sure of very little," said Junior. "But I have spent my whole life being overlooked, and a person who is overlooked learns to look, because it is the only power left to her. I have watched a great many faces that thought no one was watching. Yours is not a cold one. It is only a shut one." She said it without pity, which was the only way he could have borne to hear it. "I could be wrong. You may tell me I am wrong." The fire cracked at the far end of the room. Millicent's carol turned to its last verse, sweet and false, and drawing to its practised close. And Rodmond, who had come to Cawood Court to be left alone and had spent a decade making certain that he would be, stood at the cold window beside a portionless companion in a thrice-worn gown and understood, with a clarity that frightened him more than any threat of Croats, that he did not want her to be wrong, and that he did not want the carol to end, and that most of all he did not want this plain, unpurchased to the woman who wanted nothing from him, to be over. "You are not wrong," he heard himself say. It was the truest thing he had spoken aloud in 11 years, and it cost him something to say, and he watched her hear it and set it down carefully between them and step back from it, asking nothing, exactly as she had done before. "Then we had better go back," Junior said gently. "Before I learn anything else you would rather I did not know. They will wonder what keeps us so long in a cold corner." But she did not move at once, and neither did he, and the snow came down beyond the glass. And Rodmond thought that he could have stood there, out of the warmth and the noise, talking to this woman about nothing and everything, until the fire went out and the candles guttered and the whole scheming house had gone up to bed, and that the wanting of it, so simple, so unguarded, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to him in a very long time. They went back in the end, because there was nothing else to be done with a moment that had grown too large for the room that held it. Junior laid her hand once more upon his arm, and they returned to the warmth and the candles, and the false sweet close of Millicent's carol, and the whole company turned to see the Duke of Nordale bringing in the poor companion from the cold with his head bent to hear her. And Rodmond watched the news of it travel from face to face like a draught guttering a line of candles. He had wanted precisely this, to be seen thoroughly and be beyond doubt, to be already given away, and he found that the seeing of it now sat oddly upon him, because for the first time the thing being observed was not entirely a lie, and he did not care to have so many eyes upon a thing that was not entirely a lie. Lady Cawood, a soft and scattered woman who governed her great house as a hen governs a yard it does not quite understand, clapped her plump hands together and announced that tomorrow, if the snow held off, they should all go out to bring in the greenery, for it wanted but 3 days to Christmas Eve and the hall was as bare as Lent. There was a general murmur of pleasure. Rodmond, who had spent 11 Christmases contriving to be elsewhere when the holly came in, heard himself say that he would be glad of the air, and felt Junior's glance touch the side of his face and did not turn to meet it. Because Millicent Lovelace was watching them both with a smile so fixed and so bright it might have been cut from paper. The morning came grey and still and bitterly clear, the snow of the night before lying thin and hard as sugar over the park. And the party went out after breakfast in a straggle of furs and stout boots and baskets, the gentlemen carrying billhooks and the ladies exclaiming at the cold as though it were a thing arranged for their particular entertainment. Rodman gave Junior his arm at the door and kept it under her hand down the long avenue, and they did their work well, the two of them. He bent his dark head to her, she laughed at some low thing he said, and when Miss Lovelace drifted near upon the arm of a rueful young baronet, Junior lifted her plain grey glove to the Duke's sleeve in a small, unthinking gesture of possession that was worth, Rodman thought, a fortnight of declarations. He had underestimated her. She did not overact. She did the one true thing lightly, and let the watchers do the rest. It was easy, after that, to fall behind. The others pressed on toward the great hollies at the wood's edge, loud and merry, and Rodman turned Junior aside down a lesser path, on the pretext of a stand of ivy climbing a ruined wall. And within 100 paces the noise of the party had thinned to nothing, and there was only the crunch of their own boots, and the small tick of frost falling from a disturbed branch. He had not planned it. That was the truth he turned over as they walked. He had spent 11 years planning every corner he stepped around, and he had cut this path for no reason he could have defended to a magistrate, except that he wished to be where the noise was not with her, and to be there was becoming a wish that arrived before he had given it leave. "You gather greenery like a man who has done it before," Junior said, and hates that he remembers how. "My mother kept Christmas," he said, surprising himself. "Before my father decided the county laughed us for it. She would have the whole hall done in holly and bay, and a great bough of mistletoe over the screen, and she made the servants and the family stand together to eat on Christmas night, which my father thought a scandal, and she thought was the whole of the point. He set his billhook to a rope of ivy and drew it down from the crumbling stone in one long green ribbon. She died when I was 9. My father took down the mistletoe the same winter, and we did not put it up again. I had forgotten I knew how to do this until my hands did it." He heard the words leave him and could not think when he had last given any of them away. He had told the woman he married almost nothing. He had told Corisande a great deal once and been taught his lesson. Yet here he stood in a cold wood handing his dead mother to a girl in a thrice-washed gown as though it cost him nothing, and the strangest part was that it did cost him nothing. It was, if anything, a kind of ease. Like setting down a weight one has carried so long the arm has forgotten it holds it. "Thank you," Junior said simply, and did not fill the silence after it with sympathy, which he had come to understand was her particular gift. She let a thing be said and then let it be, and did not paw at it. She won the ivy he handed her about her arm and her wrist, twining it, and the green against the grey wool and the winter pale of her skin was, he thought, a good deal finer than anything Miss Lovelace had put on that morning at twice the cost. "My father kept Christmas too," she said after a while, "badly. He could not carve a goose to save his soul, and he sang flat, and he wept over the psalms every year without fail and pretended it was a cold." She smiled at the ivy. "He was the kindest foolish man that ever lived, and he loved my mother past all sense, and when she died he did not take down the mistletoe. He put up more. He said the house should be full of the things she liked, so that if any part of her lingered she would know she was still welcome in it. That is why the clause," Rodman said slowly. It came to him whole, the shape of it, as it had not when Croat spat it in the gallery. "The will. Married by 25 or you lose the whole." It was not a cruelty. It was the opposite of a cruelty, which is very often the same thing when the man who wrote it is dead and cannot amend it. She said it without a shred of self-pity, and that steadiness undid him more than tears could ever have done. "He was afraid of dying and leaving me to Croat, my mother's half-brother and my only kin, and a man he had never trusted an inch. He thought a clause could do for me what he would not be there to do. He thought that if he made a husband the price of the house, some good and steady man would come, and I should have a hearth and a name and someone to stand between me and Silas, and he could go to my mother easy in his mind. Her fingers stilled in the ivy. He did not reckon that Croat would spend 3 years whispering in every drawing room from here to the coast that I was a fortune-hunting nobody with a grasping guardian, so that no good steady man would come within a mile. He did not reckon that his kindness would become the very rope by which I should be hanged. He meant to save me. He built me the trap instead, and loved me the whole while he was building it. That is the part I cannot. She stopped. She looked out at the white wood. That is the part I do not speak of, as a rule. Rodman stood very still. The frost ticked from the branches. He had come to Cawood Court armoured to the teeth against exactly this, against confidence, against the soft insinuating pull of a woman's trouble, which he had taught himself to hear as the opening bid in a negotiation for his fortune. He had believed, on excellent evidence, that no one told a duke a sad story without a sum written at the bottom of it. And here was a portionless girl handing him the truest and most useful grief of her life, the very lever that a scheming woman would have worked and worked till he broke and offered her his hand in earnest, and she was not working it. She had told it and stopped. She wanted, visibly, to have said less. She had given him the weapon and then declined to pick it up, and that he understood with a lurch that felt very like falling, was the difference he had spent 11 years unable to name. Coruscant had wept to be comforted. Junior spoke plainly and wished at once she had held her tongue. You loved him, Rodman said, and you are not angry. I am furious, Junior said, and laughed, wet and brief. I am furious the way you can only be with the dead, which is to say uselessly, and with no one to take the temper out on, so it stays in and turns to fondness, which is worse. She dashed the back of her ivy-wound wrist across her eyes, once impatient with herself. There. You have made me leak in a wood. I told you I do not speak of it. You are a dangerous man to walk out with, Rodmond. You say almost nothing, and it makes a person say a great deal. And what have you had all these years, he asked, in place of a hearth and a name and a steady man to stand between you and Croat? Who has stood there? No one. She said it without complaint, as a woman states the weather. I have stood there myself. I let out my mother's gowns and took in my own, and I made myself useful to ladies who wanted a companion cheaper than a maid and better spoken than a governess. And I learned to be pleasant to people who would not have troubled to learn my Christian name. And I read a very great deal of borrowed poetry by candle ends, and I kept, somewhere under all of it, the exact recollection of a house full of mistletoe and a foolish man weeping over the psalms, so that I should know, if the day ever came, precisely what I was being asked to sell, and precisely what price was too low. She looked at him then, level and clear. That is why I would not have your Mr. Pruitt, and would not have Croat's peace, and will not have your pity now, your grace, however kindly you carry it. I have kept myself too dear these 25 years to let anyone have me cheap at the end of them, even a duke, even in play. The word play hung between them in the cold, and neither of them, for a long moment, seemed able to make it mean quite what it had meant in the gallery 3 days gone. Rodman found he could not answer it. He had proposed play. He had drawn up the terms of it himself coolly, as a man draws a lease, and he stood now in a white wood with the whole of the arrangement gone soft and strange in his hands, unable to say where the playing ended and something he had no license for began. You are a dangerous man to walk out with, Junior said again more quietly, and this time it was not quite a jest. I have been told it is my chief accomplishment, he said, and she laughed again, properly this time, the wet gone out of it. And he found he had stepped nearer to her without the decision to, near enough to see the 2 cold spots of colour high on her cheeks, and the single strand of dark hair the wind had pulled loose across her brow. He lifted his hand. He had no earthly business lifting his hand, and he watched himself do it with the detached alarm of a man observing another make a grave mistake, and he tucked the loose strand back beneath the edge of her hood with 2 fingers, slowly, and let the backs of them rest one moment against the chilled curve of her cheek. She did not move. She might have stepped back. She had stepped back from every softer thing he had said to her, set it down between them and retreated from it, asking nothing, and she did not step back from this. She stood in the white silence with the ivy about her wrist and looked up at him, her grey eyes steady on his, and Rodmund felt the whole cold architecture he had spent a decade raising go quietly, terrifyingly still, the way a great house goes still in the hour before its bell is rung. It would have been the simplest thing in the world to close the last of the distance. He was aware of it as one is aware of the edge of a height, the pull of it, the ease, the single step. Her breath showed faint and quick on the air between them. His fingers had not yeft her cheek, and it was precisely because he wanted it past all bearing, wanted it with the whole starved, unguarded part of him he had thought long since dead and buried under 3 estates, that the old fear woke and took him by the throat. Because a duke who wants nothing is safe, and a duke who wants this much can be ruined by it, and had been, once, and remembered, he drew his hand back. He did it gently, and he saw her see him do it, and he was almost certain he saw, something flicker and close behind her eyes in the exact manner he knew his own to close, a shutter drawn against a cold she was too proud to name. "We had better catch them up," he said, and his voice came out lower and rougher than he intended, "before your uncle remarks upon how long the Duke keeps his betrothed alone in a wood. It is the sort of thing he collects." "Yes," Junior said. The lightness was back in it, and it was a shade too even, and he knew, because he had built the very same Venice himself and could hear the join. "We had better." It would not do to be talked of. She unwound a length of the ivy from her wrist and held it out to him businesslike, a companion returning to her duties. "You had better carry some, or they will wonder what we found to do out here that was not gathering." He took the ivy. Their gloved hands did not touch, and both of them were careful that they did not, and the carefulness was its own confession, and they both heard it. They walked back toward the sound of the party in a silence that was no longer the easy silence of the path out. Rodmund carried the green rope over his arm and turned the moment over and could not make it lie flat. He had drawn back. He had done the wise thing, the practiced thing, the thing 11 years had made him the master of, and he felt no safety in it at all. Only the ache of a warmth withdrawn from before it could be trusted, and the growing, unwelcome certainty that the pretense he had bargained for so coolly in a cold gallery had come loose from its moorings in his own chest, and was drifting somewhere he had no chart for. They came out at the wood's edge into the noise and the baskets and the steaming breath of the others, and Junior stepped a small, correct distance from him at once, the perfect image of a companion who knows her place, and it was Millicent Lovelace who came to meet them first. Millicent in white fur, her colour high and lovely, her paper-bright smile in place. She looked at the ivy on the Duke's arm, and at the loosened strand of Junior's hair that he had tucked away and that had come free again, and at the careful distance the two of them now kept. And something moved behind her pretty eyes, quick and calculating, that Rodmund had seen before on another face in another falling snow, and mistrust to the bone. "How long you were," Millicent said sweetly, taking his other arm before he could prevent it, her fingers settling with the ease of long assumption. "We quite gave you up." "Miss Fenimore, you must not keep his grace so. In the cold, a duke has responsibilities, you know, that a companion cannot be expected to feel the weight of." She smiled at Junior, all warmth, all poison. "But then you have been so very fortunate this fortnight, to be lifted so high, so suddenly. My mother says she cannot recall its like. She says one hardly knows whether to call it a romance or a very clever piece of fortune." She turned the smile up at Rodmund and lowered her voice to the confiding register of a friend who means only his good. "Do have a care, your grace. The clause expires at Christmas, they say. It would grieve me past speaking if some sweet plain nobody were to make the coldest man in England warm just long enough to save her house and leave him with the bill." She pressed his arm and laughed as though she had said something charming, and moved him on toward the hall between the baskets of holly, and Rodmund walked where he was steered, and did not look back at Junior standing alone at the wood's edge with the frost in her hair. But the words had gone in. He felt them go in, small and cold and precise, sliding beneath the nail into the old wound that had never truly healed, and he despised Millicent Lovelace for saying them, and he despised himself far more for the fact that some starved and frightened and long-taught part of him, walking into the warm, briar-hung hall with the Christmas green coming in at every door, had heard them, and was afraid. "You are a careful man, your grace, and I am a vulgar one, so let us save each other the dance." Silas Croat had found him in the library an hour Rodmond had chosen precisely because no one of sense was abroad in it, the grey hour after a night's fresh snow, when the house lay hushed and half the company slept off their wine and the fires had only just been coaxed back to life. Rodmond had come down to be alone with a thing he did not yet have a name for, a warmth lodged under his ribs that had kept him from sleep, and that he had spent the small hours trying, without success, to argue himself out of. He had not come to be waylaid. Yet here was Croat in the doorway in a bottle-green coat too new for the country, closing the door behind him with the soft care of a man who does not wish to be interrupted at his work. "I have nothing to say to you that wants privacy," Rodmond said. "No. But I have a good deal to say to you." Croat did not sit. He came only as far as the near end of the long table and laid one thick hand upon it, flat, the way a tradesman lays down a sample. "I've watched you a fortnight, my lord, and I will own I could not make it out. A duke, 3 estates, a coronet, the pick of every drawing-room between here and town, and he fixes upon my niece, a companion, a girl in a grey gown gone soft at the cuffs. It made no sense to me, and things that make no sense keep me from my sleep, for in my experience they are generally lies." He smiled, and it was not an unkind smile, which was somehow worse than if it had been. "And then I remembered the will." Rodmond said nothing. He had learned, long ago, the particular power of giving a man like Croat nothing to push against. "You will not have troubled with the whole of it," Croat went on, comfortable now, warming to the sound of his own cleverness. "Why should you? A country attorney's dry business. But I have troubled with it, my lord, these 3 years, for it is my bread. Her sainted father, a sentimental fool, I have told her so to her face, left the whole of it, the house at Marholm, the portion every farthing, upon one condition. She is to be wed her 25th year, which expires, as it happens, upon Christmas Day, wed by Christmas, and she keeps it all. Unwed, and it comes to me who have kept her these 7 years and had precious little thanks for it." He turned his hand over on the table, palm up empty, presenting the sum of it. "Now, a pretend on her arm does her no good whatever. A dissolved betrothal, a broken engagement, the county sighing over the poor girl who thought better of it. That buys her a little dignity and not 1 acre. Only a ring does that. A real ring, my lord, on a real hand, before the church, before the year runs out." "You have a point to make," Rodmond said. "Make it and take your green coat out of my mourning. My point is this." Croat leaned a little upon the flat hand. "You believe she wants nothing of you. I have watched her sell you that, and I have watched you buy it. And I will tell you it is the finest piece of work I have seen a woman do. And I have seen a great many women work. A girl who wept and clung. You would have known her for a fortune hunter in an afternoon and been gone the next. But a girl who asks for nothing, who will not flatter you, who scolds you, who hands her warmth about the table to curates and cripples as though your regard were the last thing on earth she sought. That is the hook, my lord, that looks like no hook at all, and it is fixed in you to the barb. Ask yourself only this, when next she looks at you so honest and wants so nothing. Ask yourself why a portionless girl with a house to win and 11 days to win it in should trouble to be quite so very artless with the one man in England who could sign the whole of it back to her by Christmas morning. He straightened and drew on his gloves and the leather side against his knuckles. "I mean her no harm," he said, which was the largest lie of the several he had told. "Wed her if you like, and give me the pleasure of losing Marholm. I shall bear it. Or find you have been played, and thank me for the warning. Either road, you cannot say Silas Croat left you walking into the dark. Good morning, your grace. It is a very fine snow." He went out, and the soft closed door made no more sound than a man's held breath, and Rodmond was left alone in the grey library with the fire ticking and the splinter under the nail beginning, after 11 quiet years, to throb. He told himself it was nonsense. He told himself he had watched Croat poison a room before and knew the taste of the man's work, that this was only a cornered creature's last cast, flung at the one thing that might unseat what stood between him and a house. All of that was true, and he knew it to be true, and it did him no good at all, for the poison had not been mixed to be believed by his reason. It had been mixed for the other thing, the older thing, the raw place under the lacquer that no argument had ever reached, a ballroom 11 years gone. Snow falling past long windows then as now, a laugh like silver bells, and a voice that had said, when it thought him out of hearing, that the Duke of Nordale was a cold, dull fish, but a girl might warm herself very handsomely at 3 estates. He had built his whole life upon the lesson of that laugh. That warmth offered to a duke was a coin, and every coin counterfeit, and a wise man kept his hands in his pockets and did not stoop to pick them up. And here he had stooped. He had bent his whole guarded self down to the ground for a grey-eyed girl who wanted nothing, and Crote had shown him in 9 minutes the exact shape of the everything she might want, and set it, with an ugly craftsman's precision, upon the Christmas day at the end of the clause. He did not go up to break his fast with the company. He walked out instead into the fresh snow of the terrace, and stood bareheaded in the cold until it numbed him, and he could not warm himself, and the not warming felt like the truest thing he had touched in days. A robin came and went along the balustrade, bright and busy, indifferent to him. Somewhere within, the breakfast bell was rung and answered by a scrape of chairs and a swell of voices, and he did not go into them, and he thought that if he stood here long enough the cold might do for him what 11 years of it had not, and settle the matter, and leave him at peace. It did not. It only made him colder, and left the question exactly where it had been, throbbing under the nail. He should have gone to her plainly. He knew even then that he should have gone to her and laid Crote's poison on the table between them the way she laid everything, in the open, asking nothing, and said, "Your uncle has told me of the will and the day, and I should like to hear it from you." She would have told him true. He knew her well enough by now to know she would have told him true, and that would have been the end of it. But to go to her so was to trust, and to trust was to hand her the knife and turn his back, and 11 years stood up in him all at once and would not let him do it, so he did the other thing. He did the thing a shut man does, who has mistaken his shutness for wisdom for so long that he no longer feels the door close. He went to find her cold. He came upon her in the little morning room off the east passage, where she had gone to mend a tear in her cousin Amelia's flounce before the girl should wake and want it. She was alone, bent to the light of the window with the rose stuff across her knee, and when she heard his step she looked up. And something in her face opened, plainly, gladly, without a particle of guard, and it was that, God forgive him, the very openness of it, that struck him hardest, for his poisoned eye had learned overnight to read the openness as the deepest guard of all. "You did not come down," she said. "I looked for you. I had business." She heard it at once, she heard everything, and set the needle still. "You are cold this morning," she said, not as a complaint but as an observation, the way she had once named him a warm man behaving like a cold one, in the green-hung saloon, in the candlelight, when he had told her she was not wrong, colder than you have been with me since the gallery. "Has something happened? Your uncle and I have spoken." "Ah." She set the mending aside. "Then I can guess the temperature of the room. What did he sell you?" "The will," Rodmund said. "The whole of it, which you did not trouble to give me whole." "Marholm, the portion, the condition. A husband by Christmas Day, or you keep nothing." He heard his own voice do the thing it did in council chambers, the level cold thing that gave nothing and asked for blood, and he could not stop it. And part of him stood off and watched himself with something like horror while the rest of him drove on. "You told me your circumstances. You told me a great deal that evening you told me a great deal. You did not tell me that." Her face did not crumple. He would remember that. It went instead very still, and the stillness was worse. "No," she said, "I did not. Would you like to know why? I should like it above all things. Because it was the one part of my life that could be mistaken for a design upon yours." She rose, unhurried, the way she did everything, and stood with her chin at its honest level, and the December light was hard and plain upon her thrice-worn grey. "I have wanted you to think well of me, Rodmund. I will own that much, since we are being cold, and so I kept back the one fact that a suspicious man would fold into a scheme. I see now that I ought to have told you first, and let you make of it what you would rather than keep it, and let my uncle hand it to you tricked out in his own colours. That was cowardice in me, and I am sorry for it. But I hear from your voice that the confession comes too late, and that he has already told you what to see." "And what am I to see?" he said. "Tell me it plainly." "A girl who wants nothing, 3 days' talk in a cold window, and a house at Marholm that falls to her the instant she can find a fool to marry her by the 25th. You are clever, Junior, you are the cleverest woman I have met in a decade, and I am asking you cleverly whether I have been clever enough. The silence in the little room was of the particular texture he had watched her make of the saloon 2 nights before, the silence of a person struck, deciding whether to strike back. She did not strike back. That was the thing that would sit in him afterward like a stone swallowed whole. She only looked at him, a long look, cool and grey and entirely without the practised alarm of a woman found out, and what he read in it at last was not guilt and not fear, but a kind of grief, quiet and complete. The grief of one who has watched a thing she prized break in a hand she thought she could trust. So there it is, she said softly. I wondered that first day in the gallery what had made you so. A man does not grow a wall that high against nothing. I did not ask, because you were not mine to ask. But I know its shape now well enough. Someone taught you a long while ago that a woman's warmth was a coin, and that every coin was false, and that a wise man kept his hands in his pockets. She saw him flinch. He felt it go across his own face before he could master it, and she nodded, slowly as at a sum that had at last come out. I am sorry for her, whoever she was, and sorrier for you, but I will not be tried for her crime, Rodmond. I have been overlooked my whole life, and mocked in a saloon and threatened in a gallery, and I have borne all of it with a level chin, because it cost me only my comfort. This costs me more. To stand in a plain room in a plain gown and be told that the one honest thing I offered a man, the only thing I had that was worth the giving, was a counterfeit slipped into his pocket. That I find I cannot bear level. So I shall not try. Junior. No, she said it as she had said it to her uncle in the gallery, without heat, immovable. You may keep your suspicion. It is plainly older and dearer to you than I could ever be, and it has kept you warmer these 11 years than I managed in 4 days. I release you from the bargain, your grace. There is no need to dissolve it prettily for the county's sake. There is nothing left in it to dissolve. Tell them what you please. Tell them the poor girl thought better of the cold Duke of Nordale. It will even be true. Her voice did not break, but it thinned at the last, to the very edge of breaking, and she gathered the rose mending up off the chair to give her hands something to do that was not trembling. I had rather be nothing and keep the one thing about myself I was proud of than win a house and a duke by making a bargain of it. My uncle will be delighted to hear I have come round to his figures at last. She went to the door. He should have crossed the room. He knew it with a violence that shook him, that the whole of his life turned upon these 3 seconds and the width of a morning-room floor, that he had only to move, only to say the true word he had said to her once at the cold window, and had meant more than any word in 11 years. That she was not wrong, that he was not cold, that Croat had reached into the oldest wound in him and turned it, and he had let a dead laugh in a lost ballroom speak for a living woman in a grey gown. He knew it. And 11 years of standing still stood him still now, when standing still was the one thing that could ruin him, and the door opened under her hand and the cold of the passage came in. She paused on the threshold. She did not turn all the way round. You were the first person, she said, to the passage rather than to him, to look at me as though I were the whole of what a man wanted. You told me it was acting. I believed you, and then I stopped believing you, and that was my mistake, and I shall not make it twice. And then she was gone. And her step went away down the east passage at the even pace of a woman crossing her own hall, neither quick nor in flight. And Rodmond stood in the middle of the little morning-room with the fire ticking and the snow falling past the window exactly as it had fallen past another window 11 years before, and understood that he had done it to himself. He did not follow. Pride is a wall a man builds to keep the enemy out, and the cruelty of it is the day it keeps him in, alone, with nothing to guard. He stood a long while. He heard, distantly, the house wake to its Christmas idleness, a maid's tread on the stair, Millicent's loft somewhere below like a bright coin spinning on a table, the muffled roll of a carriage arriving in the fresh snow. And he thought coldly, clearly, in the level voice that had never once done him any good in the only matters that mattered, that Silas Croat had lost his house and won his war, that the one person under this scheming roof who had wanted nothing of him had at last been taught to want nothing of him in earnest, and that he, Rodmond, Duke of Nordale, who had feared all his life to be loved for the wrong reasons, had contrived at the last to be left, cleanly and justly for the right ones. The fire settled. Beyond the glass the snow came down and down upon the park at Cawood, whitening the lane by which, in 11 days, unless something broke the frozen thing that had closed between them, she would go out of the house and out of his reach into whatever nothing she had chosen over him, and he stood in the wreck of his own long-guardedness and could not, for all his cold cleverness. Think how in the world a man unlearned the lesson of 11 years in 10 short days. For 2 days the Duke of Nordale did the wise thing, and the wise thing was a slow and thorough poison. He rose, and he dressed with care, and he came down to Lady Cawood's table and made his cold civil remarks over the kidneys and the chocolate, and he did not once seek out the grey figure at the far end of the board who no longer sought him. That was the whole of his accomplishment now. He had said a thing to Junior Fenimore on the night the greenery came in, had said it in a low, even voice with his back half to her, and a settlement half drawn in his mind, that the arrangement had served its turn, and that a man in his position could not be seen forever squiring his hostess's companion about the shrubberies, and that he would see her uncle's hold on the house discharged, and a sum settled on her outright, so that neither of them need play at anything further. He had heard Millicent's words come out of his own mouth, as though he had learned them by rote. He had watched Junior go the colour of the frost on the window, and he had said the last thing, the unforgivable thing. The thing he had not known was in him until it was already in the air between them, that she had played her part almost too well, and that he had wondered, once or twice, whether she meant to make the coldest man in England warm just long enough to keep her father's roof over her head, and leave him with the bill. He had wondered no such thing. That was the part that would not let him sleep. He had not believed it for the breadth of a single heartbeat. He had reached for it the way a drowning man reaches for the nearest hard thing, to strike the water away from his own face, and the nearest hard thing had been her. She had not wept. He had almost broken and gone to her when she did not weep, because a woman who wept could be soothed, and a woman who did not could only be answered, and he had no answer. She had stood very straight in the failing candlelight and looked at him for a long moment as one looks at a sum written at the bottom of a page, and she had said, "You need not have your Mr. Pruitt draw anything up, Your Grace. You have been very clear. I told you in the wood that I had kept myself too dear to be had cheap, and I find that a duke's cheque is the cheapest offer I have yet been made, because it costs the man who signs it nothing at all." And she had made him a curtsy of exactly the depth his rank required and not 1 inch more. And she had gone up to her narrow room under the eaves, and since that night she had been the perfect companion, fetching Lady Cawood's shawl, turning Lady Cawood's music, keeping her eyes at the level of other people's chins, and looking at him, when the accident of a room forced her to look at him at all, as though he were a handsome piece of furniture she had once been asked to dust. It was Christmas Eve now, and the house was full of holly and bay and the smell of the great fire and the small sharp misery of a thing done that could not be undone. And Rodmond, standing at the tall window of the long gallery with his hands clasped hard behind him, understood at last, with the particular clarity that comes too late to be of any use, exactly what manner of man he had made of himself. He had told himself for 11 years that his coldness was wisdom. Corisande had cured him of warmth, Corisande with her wet blue eyes and her borrowed griefs, who had wept so beautifully into his coat in a summer house a lifetime ago, and let him believe he was the only living soul who understood her, and who had gone off, when his father cut the purse strings for a season to test the match, on the arm of a vicomte with a surer income and a warmer climate. Laughing, he had built his whole guarded life upon the lesson of her, that when a person offers a duke their sorrow, they are offering him a bill, and the only safety lies in refusing to read it. He had married coldly and buried coldly and lived coldly and been, by every measure the world kept, entirely safe. And here was the sum of that safety. He had taken the one person in a decade who had handed him her grief and asked nothing for it, who had indeed tried to snatch it back the instant it was out, ashamed to have leaked in a wood, and he had read her a bill she had never presented, and paid it, insultingly, to be rid of the terror of what she made him feel. She had kept herself dear her whole hard life. She had refused Croat's peace and Pruitt's money, and had gone on letting out her dead mother's gowns, rather than sell the memory of a foolish weeping man and a house full of mistletoe for 1 farthing under its worth. And in his fear he had offered her the one thing on earth she had spent 25 years teaching herself to refuse, and he had dressed it in Corasande's suspicion, and he had called it wisdom. It was not wisdom. He saw it plainly now, in the grey Christmas light, with the sounds of the household laughing somewhere below. It was cowardice wearing a coronet. He had not protected himself from a schemer. There had been no schemer. He had protected himself from being loved, because being loved was the one exposure against which no rank could arm him, and he had done it by wounding the only creature who had ever come near to loving him plainly for no wage but himself. He thought of the ivy she had wound about her wrist, green against the winter pale of her skin, and how he had judged it finer than anything Miss Lovelace put on at twice the cost, and how that judgment had frightened him more than any duel. He thought of the tick of frost falling in the wood, and of his own dead mother handed to a girl in a thrice-washed gown as though it cost him nothing, and of how it had, in truth, cost him nothing, how it had been the first ease he had known in 11 years, and how he had run from that ease the moment Millicent named it aloud. The way a man runs from a lit room back into a dark he has learned to call safe. He had drawn his hand back from her cheek in the white silence and told himself he did the wise thing. He had drawn back from her again in the failing candlelight with a settlement upon his lips, and called that wisdom too. A man could spend his whole life drawing back, he saw now, and name the retreat by 100 prudent names, and wake one grey morning to find he had backed clean out of the single doorway through which any warmth had ever tried to reach him, and pulled it shut and bolted it, and called the cold that followed peace. "You look, Nordale," said a voice at his shoulder, dry and unhurried, like a man reading his own obituary and finding it fairer than he deserves. He had not heard Lady Colwood come. She was not, he had learned this past fortnight, the scattered hen she played. She governed her yard a good deal more shrewdly than she let the world suppose, and she stood beside him now with her plump hands folded and her bright old eyes on the snow. "I have been unpardonable to a guest under your roof," Rodmond said. He had never in his life confessed a fault aloud to a soul, and he found the doing of it cost less than he feared and mattered more. "You would be within your rights to have me from the house." "I would," she agreed comfortably. "I shan't, for it would spoil my Christmas, and besides she would not thank me for it." She let that sit a moment, and Rodmond felt it go in like a hook. "She goes tomorrow, you know. First light on the Marham coach, with that oily uncle of hers, who arrived this morning wonderfully pleased with himself. The clause falls in at midnight tonight, 25 years to the hour her poor father set it, and no husband come. And so the house at Marham goes to Silas Croat by the terms of it, and she is to keep it for him as his housekeeper at a wage, in the rooms that were her mother's. The old woman's voice did not change, and that was the cruelty of it. He has offered it as a great kindness before the whole drawing-room, and she has accepted it before the whole drawing-room, because a girl with nothing and nowhere cannot afford to fling a roof back in a man's face however she came by it, and Miss Lovelace has been so very sympathetic, and my house has been so very warm, and I have been watching a proud girl smile all afternoon over the grave of her whole life. I thought you might care to know it, Nordale, before you finish admiring your obituary. She would not have wanted me to tell you. That is chiefly why I have." The snow went on falling, small and steady, into the white park where 2 days before they had walked with the ivy. Rodmond found that his hands had come unclasped from behind him and were hanging at his sides, and that his heart was beating in the slow, enormous way it had beaten in the wood, in the hour before its bell was rung. At midnight the clause would fall in, and she would take the coach at first light, and keep her dead mother's rooms at a wage for the man her father had died afraid of, and she would do it with her chin up and her eyes at the level of other people's, and she would be safe from him forever, which was the thing he had told himself for 2 days that he wanted. He did not want it. He had never in his life wanted anything so little as he wanted her safe from him. "Where is she?" he said. Lady Colwood looked up at him, and something in the shrewd old face eased, as though a wager privately laid had privately been won. "The little chapel off the east cloister," she said. "She goes there to be where the others are not. She thinks nobody knows it. Everybody knows it, we are only kind enough to pretend we don't. She reached up, before he could move, and set her plump hand flat against his chest, over the coat, over the place the words had gone in 2 days before. You are about to do the least wise thing you have done in 11 years, Your Grace, she said, and mind you do it thoroughly. She has had wisdom enough from you to last a lifetime. He went. He did not send for his man, nor smooth his coat, nor compose upon his face the cold arrangement he had worn to every consequential room of his adult life. He went down the great stair 2 at a time like a boy, past the astonished footman and the piled holly, and the paper-bright stare of Millicent Lovelace rising from her chair in the hall with his name already sweet on her lips, and he did not stop for her, did not so much as turn his head. So that whatever clever, kind poison she had loaded went off harmlessly into the air behind him, and he never learned what it was and never after cared. He crossed the freezing cloister, with his breath smoking, and the snow whispering on the leads above. And he came to the low arched door of the chapel, and put his hand to the cold iron of it, and found, for the first time in the memory of a man who had faced down duels and creditors and the whole massed disapproval of his county without a flicker, that he was afraid to open a door. He opened it. She was kneeling at the low rail, though not at prayer. She was simply where the others were not, as Lady Culwood had said, her grey travelling gown already on, her hands folded on the wood and her forehead resting on them, and one small worn valise set on the stone flags beside her, corded, ready for a first light coach and the rest of her life. She heard the door, and she was on her feet before he had the whole of her in his eye, her spine going straight in the old proud way, her face composing itself into the smooth companion's mask he had come to hate with his whole soul. Your Grace, she said, you have mistaken your door. The company is at the hall. I have not mistaken it. He shut the door behind him. The single candle at the rail threw her shadow enormous up the whitewashed wall. Junior, I have come to take back every word I said to you on the night the greenery came in, and I know a man cannot take back words, and I am going to try in front of you anyway, because I find there is nothing left in me that I would rather keep than the hope of your forgiveness. And that is a sentence I did not know I had the making of until this hour. She stood very still. The mask did not fall, but something behind it flickered. The shutter he knew, drawn against a cold she was too proud to name. You need not, she said. You were perfectly clear, and perfectly within your rights, and I have taken no lasting hurt from it. Pray do not trouble your Christmas with, I lied to you, he said, about all of it. I did not believe you meant to trap me. I have never believed it for the space of one breath. I said it to strike the water from my own face, because I was drowning, and you were the nearest hard thing, and I have never in my life been so ashamed of a thing done to another living soul. The words were coming now in the low voice of the wood, the voice with no arrangement in it. 11 years ago a woman wept upon my coat, and I thought I was loved, and she was gone by autumn on a warmer man's arm, and I swore no one would ever again offer me their heart, but that I should read the price beneath it first. I have kept that oath, Junior. I have kept it against every soul who ever came near me, and I called the keeping of it wisdom, and it has made me exactly the man Miss Lovelace described in the wood, the coldest man in England. And I stood in the gallery this afternoon and understood at last that I have not been guarding a fortune all these years. I have been guarding against you. Against the precise and particular danger of being loved by someone who wanted nothing of me but myself, because that is the one bill no coronet on earth can arm a man to pay. He heard her breath go once unsteady, and he did not stop, because he understood that if he stopped he would never begin again. You handed me your father in a cold wood, he said, and your mother, and the whole terrible kindness of that clause. And you tried to snatch it back the moment it was out, because you could not bear to have leaked in front of me, and you asked me for nothing, not a farthing, not a promise, not so much as my pity, which you told me plainly you would not have. And I took the truest grief of your life and I read it to you as a fraud, and I offered you money, which you had spent 25 years learning to refuse, and I did it because I was frightened past bearing. And I dressed my fright as suspicion, because suspicion was the only feeling I still knew how to wear in company. He took one step nearer, no more, and stopped himself, because he had drawn back from her once in a wood, and he would not now come uninvited, not for all the world. Lady Culwood tells me you go at first light, that the clause falls in at midnight, and the house goes to your uncle, and you are to keep your mother's rooms at a wage. And I have come to tell you, before that hour strikes, and while I am still merely a man who wounded you and not yet a man who let you go, that I am not offering you a check, Junior. I have nothing to offer you that is cheap. I am offering you the whole of the ruin I have made of myself, which is worth, I am well aware, a very great deal less than you have kept yourself for, and I am offering it anyway, on my honor and against every prudent thing 11 years taught me, because you are the only creature alive who ever made the coldest man in England warm, and did it asking nothing, and I would rather stand here and be refused by you honestly than be safe from you for the rest of my life. The candle guttered. She had not moved, and her grey eyes were bright and terrible in the little light, and the mask was gone from her face, wholly gone at last. And what was under it he could not yet read, and he stood in the freezing chapel with his heart laid open on the stones between them and waited, unarmed, for whatever she would do with it. He had come across the whole white breadth of the park to find her. And now that he stood before her in the raw cold of the orangery, where she had gone to be alone among the dead orange trees and the frosted glass, he found that all the level, careful sentences he had built on the walk deserted him at once, and what was left was only the truth, which he had never in 11 years permitted himself to speak aloud to any living soul. There was a woman, he said. Her name was Corisande. This was 11 years ago, and I was younger than I like to remember, and I believed her when she told me under the falling snow that she loved me. I heard her, not an hour later, tell her friends upon the terrace that the Duke of Nordale was a cold, dull fish, but that a girl might warm herself very comfortably at 3 estates. His breath stood white between them. I have carried that laugh in me ever since, Junior. The way a man carries a splinter he has never had the courage to cut out. And it taught me a lesson I made the whole of my life obey, that warmth offered to a duke is a coin, and every coin is false, and a wise man keeps his hands in his pockets. She had not moved. She stood among the barren trees with her shawl drawn close and her chin level, in the very attitude in which he had first seen her in the cold gallery, a person who had decided long ago that the world would not have the satisfaction of watching her flinch. But her eyes were on him now, grey and steady and terribly still, and he made himself go on into them. Croat knew where the wound was, he said. I do not know how a servant's talk, an old scandal dragged up, it does not signify. He came to me, and he told me you had boasted of your cleverness in the servants' hall, that you had said you would have the cold duke to the altar and his purse open before the frost was off the ground. And I, who have spent 11 years priding myself that no man alive could deceive me, I swallowed it whole, because it was the thing I had trained myself to believe. I let a dead woman's laugh in a lost ballroom speak for you. I looked at you across that morning room and I made my face a wall, and I let you walk out through that door, and I stood still, when standing still was the one act in this world that could ruin me. His voice did not break, but it thinned, and he let it. That is what I did. I am not here to excuse it. I am here because I would rather you knew the whole shape of my cowardice than think, for 1 hour more, that the fault was in you. For a long moment there was no sound but the small tick of the frost settling on the glass above them. Then she said, quietly, you believed him over me. I believed 11 years over you, he said. It is not better. It is only more exact. No, she agreed, and the word was not cruel, only honest, which from her had always been the harder thing. It is not better. She looked away from him at last, out through the clouded panes to the white park, and he watched her profile and understood that he had earned nothing here, that a man did not undo in 10 minutes the wall he had spent a decade mortaring, and that whatever she gave him now, if she gave him anything, she would give freely or not at all, and that this, precisely this, was the whole of why he loved her. I told you at the beginning, she said, still to the glass, that you had merely to permit yourself to be looked at as though you were the whole of what a man wanted. You said it was you who must do the acting. I have thought a great deal, these last days, about which of us was the better liar. She turned back to him. It was neither. That is what I cannot forgive you. Not that you doubted me, but that you knew, as surely as I knew, that it had stopped being a game long before Croat ever opened his mouth. You stopped pretending first, Rodmond. I saw you stop. And then a florid little man told you a story, and you picked the splinter up again and drove it in, because it hurt less than the other thing. Yes, he said. There was no other word to give her. It hurt less than the other thing. It always has. That is the whole disease of me, Junior, and I am ashamed of it, and I am done with it. Are you? It was not quite a question. I am standing in a cold house full of dead trees, he said, having walked 2 miles through the snow to say a thing to you that I have never said to any creature born, and if that is not proof enough, then I have nothing better to offer, for I have spent it all. I do not want a betrothal quietly dissolved. I do not want a season of pretense with a civil parting at the end of it. I want the thing I have been afraid of my whole life. I want to be loved by a woman who has seen the cold dull fish and the 3 estates both, and has told me plainly sooner keep her own soul than have either. He came a step nearer, over the frost-white stone. I am asking you to marry me. Not to save you from Croat. You never once asked to be saved, and I think you would refuse me if I offered it as a rescue. I am asking because you have undone 11 years of me, and I find I've no wish at all to have them back. She was quiet so long that he heard his own heart. The light through the frosted glass lay pale on her plain grey gown, and she did not look, in that moment, like a woman weighing a duke and a title and a wall her uncle could not climb. She looked like a woman deciding whether she dared believe a thing she wanted. Say it without the marrying, she said at last. Without the church, without the will, without my uncle or your title or 1 farthing of anything. If there were nothing to be had by it at all, say the thing under it. And Rodmond, who had never in his life said it and had meant it, said it now and meant it. I love you. I have loved you since you told your uncle that his threat lost none of its music through repetition. I did not know it was that then. I know it now. I love you, and I have been a coward about it, and I would like to spend the rest of a long, dull life at 3 estates proving to you that I have learned better. Something in her face gave way, not broke, for nothing in her broke, but eased, as a frozen thing eases in the first warmth, and he saw the steadiness he had loved go bright and wet at the edges without once losing its footing. There, she said unevenly. That is the man I would not have from a bargain. You were very slow to fetch him. I am aware, he said. I mean to be quicker hereafter. He raised his hand and did not quite touch her. The old near touch that had hung between them at the cold window and the dusk garden and had never yet been permitted to finish itself. And this time she closed the distance herself, laid her cheek into his cold palm as though it were the warmest thing in England. And when he bent to her at last, it was slow and grave and complete, a promise rather than a beginning, and the frost ticked down around them, and neither of them heard it. When he drew back, her eyes were shut, and he thought he had never in his life been trusted with anything so entirely, and that he would rather die than be careless of it. Junior, he said against her hair, I want to do one thing more, and I want to do it before all of them, and I want you to tell me if you would rather I did not. She drew back to look at him. What thing? I want to choose you where they can see it, he said, not to shame them, to end it. Your uncle has spent a season teaching this house that you are a girl to be pitied and passed over. I should like to teach it the opposite, once thoroughly, and then never trouble anyone with the lesson again. The great drawing room at Cawood Court was full to its gilt cornices that afternoon, for it was Christmas Eve and the whole party had gathered for the wassail and the carols, the fire built high, the holly thick along the mantel, the candles doubling themselves in the dark windows. Lady Cawood was dispensing negus from a silver bowl. Miss Millicent Lovelace stood near the pianoforte in a gown the colour of ripe apricots, radiant and watchful, her mother at her shoulder like a general behind a favoured line, and at the edge of it all, where the successful placed the useful, stood Silas Croat in his too rich coat, with a lean grey man beside him whom Rodmond had never met but knew at once for the wretched Mr. Pruitt, come to collect a bride by the terms of a dead man's will. Rodmond came into the room with Junior's hand upon his arm, and he felt the whole assembly turn, as rooms had turned him all his life, but he had never before walked into that turning with anything he wished to say. The talk thinned. Millicent's smile arranged itself, bright and ready. Croat's florid face went carefully, dangerously blank. Lady Cawood, Rodmond said, and though he did not raise his voice, the room gave it all the silence a duke's voice commanded. You have been these 3 weeks the most patient hostess in the county, and I have been the poorest guest, solitary, ungracious, forever declining your suppers. I find I owe the whole house an explanation, and it is a happy one, so I shall make it to all of you at once and spare myself the repeating. He looked down at the woman on his arm. Miss Fenimore has done me the honor of consenting to be my wife. We are to be married on Christmas Day, in the chapel here, if Lady Carwood will forgive so short a notice, and I do not think there is a soul present whose good wishes I value as I value the sight of her standing where she is. The room made the sound rooms make when they must decide in an instant which way to fall. Lady Carwood, who was not a bad woman, only a careless one, recovered first and cried out her delight and clapped her plump hands, and the assembly, given its lead, poured after her into congratulation. But Rodmond was not watching Lady Carwood. He was watching two faces at the room's cold edge. Millicent Lovelace held her smile through it with a courage he could almost have admired. Only her eyes moved once from Junior's soft grey cuffs to Junior's steady face. And something in them understood at last that she had lost the season not to a rival's beauty or fortune, but to a quality she had never thought worth the counterfeiting, and did not know how to begin. She inclined her head, a small correct bow. Miss Fenimore is to be congratulated, she said, and if it cost her, she did not show more than a woman of her training must. Rodmond gave her, in return, the first genuinely kind look he had ever spent on her, for a graceful loser deserved that much, and she took it and turned away, and her mother's face behind her was worth, he thought, the whole 3 weeks of pursuit. Silas Croat was of causer stuff. He pushed forward through the well-wishers with his colour climbing, and his voice when it came was pitched to carry, for a desperate man reaches always for the crowd. This is very sudden, your grace, and very pretty, but I fear you have been imposed upon. The girl is my ward. There is a settlement upon her, conditions, sir, in her late father's will, and I cannot in conscience permit her to contract herself where there is no. There is a settlement, Rodmond said, and the pleasantness went out of his voice and left behind it the thing men owed money to men who owed money to dukes had learned to fear across a snowy gallery 3 weeks before. I have read it. Married before her 25th year, or the house and portion passed to you. She will be married before witnesses in a consecrated chapel on Christmas morning, 2 days inside the term. The condition is met. The house is hers. And you, Mr. Croat, will have travelled a very long way in the cold for nothing, unless you should care to remain for the wedding, though I think you will find the roads to your liking sooner than that. You cannot, Croat began. I am a duke, sir, Rodmond said, almost gently, and you are a man who has spent his credit. You know precisely which of those two facts the world attends to. You have poisoned this county against a portionless girl for a 12-month. You told me to my face a lie about her that I was fool enough to believe for the space of a day, and I have not forgiven myself it, and I shall certainly never forgive you. Take your Mr. Pruitt and go. If you are ever uncivil to my wife again, by word or by silence, I will make it my particular study to acquaint every house that has ever received you with the precise arithmetic of your affairs. I have a very good memory and a great deal of leisure. He paused. Do we understand one another? Croat understood. His mouth worked as it had worked in the gallery. The colour drained from florid to grey, and he removed himself with the wretched Pruitt at his heel, through the parting crowd and out into the snow, with the scuttling haste of a man who has remembered a pressing engagement in another county. And this time Rodmond watched him go and felt not heat, but only a clean and final quiet, the particular peace of a wound cauterized at last. Then he turned back to the room, and to the woman beside him, and found that Junior was regarding him with her brows a little raised. You said you did not mean to shame them, she murmured for his ear alone. I said I did not mean to shame them for its own sake, he answered. I confess I found I enjoyed it rather more than a reformed man ought. You will have to correct the fault in me over a number of years. A great number, she agreed, and a hand tightened on his arm, and the carols began. They were married on Christmas morning in the little stone chapel at Carwood, with frost on every leaded pane, and the whole improbable party crowded into the pews behind them, for a wedding got up in a night is a marvel a country house will not miss for anything the world can offer. She wore the grey gown, He had offered her, the evening before, the whole contents of every warehouse in the county, silk and lace and whatever a duchess was held to require. And she had thanked him and declined, and said that the grey gown was the gown she had been wearing when a stranger troubled himself over a matter that gained him nothing, and she found she was fond of it, and did he object? He did not object. He stood at the cold altar and watched her come up the short aisle at the even pace of a woman crossing her own hall, neither quick nor in flight, in a gown gone soft at the cuffs from too many washings. And he thought that in all his life at all his 3 estates he had never seen anything he wanted to keep so much. Afterward, when the wassail had been drunk and the good wishes spent and the guests had scattered at last to their fires, he found her at the tall window of the long gallery where he had first heard her voice come down the cold stone like water through a crack. The snow was falling again, small and fine against the dark, whitening the lane by which she had so nearly gone out of the house and out of his reach. He came and stood behind her and put his arms about her, and she leaned back into him without a word, and they watched it come down together. "It was snowing," he said, "the first time a woman told me she loved me. I have hated the sight of snow for 11 years, and now?" He considered the white park and the lane, and the woman warm against his chest, who had asked him to say the thing with the marrying stripped away, and had married him only after he had proved he did not need it. "Now," he said, "I find I am glad of the cold. It gives a man a reason to hold what is warm and not let go of it. I had forgotten there was such a reason. I do not intend to forget it again." She turned within the circle of his arms to look up at him, grey eyes steady and shining, the whole of what a man wanted, and no longer any need on earth for either of them to act it. "Then hold on, Rodmond," she said. "I am done being nothing, and I have no intention whatever of being let go." "On that," said the Duke of Nordale, who had come to Cawood Court to be left in peace and was leaving it with his whole guarded heart given cleanly away, "we are entirely agreed." And he drew her in out of the sight of the falling snow, and held on, and did not let go, that year, nor any of the long warm years that came after it.